Hello and welcome back to The Load-In, a United Theater podcast with me, your host, Lee Metzger. Take a look around, folks. Not your usual set, huh? Where's Lee's desk? Where's Lee's computer? Where's Lee's confusing Post-it notes that say inappropriate things behind him? Don't go back and look for those, by the way. I'm here at Stone Acres Farm talking with some new friends, or maybe one specific new friend, about some incredibly cool events coming up here at the United Theater. Not here, because this is Stone Acres, but at the United Theater. So stick around and we're going to talk to Eric Dawson of Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. It's The Load-In. Hello and welcome back. I am very excited to be joined today by Program Innovator, Officer Director, Mr. Man, Eric Dawson. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me. This is really cool.
Well, I'm here today to talk to my friend Eric about a very specific event that's coming up at the United Theater this Sunday. Nope, this Saturday.
Or Sunday, right?
Yes, it is Sunday. You're right.
I hope so.
It's Sunday. I'm gonna have to move some stuff around. This Sunday at 4:00 at the United Theater is it's an event we love doing as part of our United Table series at the theater. We love partnering with local organizations to talk about different, unique culinary aspects of life, and this one is interesting because we're like diving into fermentation.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about fermentation and what people can expect from this event.
Yeah. So fermentation in general is basically using good microbes to transform food from one form to another. It's oftentimes used as like a preservation method. So think like your sauerkrauts, your kimchis, your pickles, those types of things, which is all great types of fermentation. But what we focus here at the Yellow Farmhouse is specifically called Koji fermentation. So using this mold, so it's a mold, think like bread mold, stuff like that, but this is a mold that's edible. It is grown on rice grains, steamed rice, and then same way that you'd use like a sourdough starter to make like your sourdough bread, you can use Koji, this Koji rice, as a way to preserve and transform foods into all sorts of like unique and different flavors and textures and all that sort of stuff. It's really cool. It's really just harnessing the power of microbes, things that are growing on the Koji, things that are just naturally occurring on like the foods that we eat every day, and sort of using that, like leveraging that like microbial action to do a lot of like the cooking and transformation work of food for us, essentially.
You ever think about like, I'm sure you do because you're locked into this stuff, but you ever think about like why are we doing this? Like fermentation, you know, like at some point I saw some documentary years ago about the invention of beer, and people are like, oh, you know, like beer might be the reason that hunter-gatherers stopped hunting and gathering, because like, you know, they put some grains into like a big rock that had an indentation in it, and then it rained, and then it sat there over the weekend, and then the hunters and gatherers scooped it up and started drinking it and got a little funky that night, and then they were like, well, let's just hang out next to this and keep making this gross water that makes us lose our minds. Like, what do you make of that, of like the history of fermentation and things like that?
Yeah, so the history of fermentation is like so cool. Through KojiCon, one of the events that the Yellow Farmhouse puts on, we're able to host presentations from all sorts of folks in the fermentation realm, from like historians, authors, scientists, all those sorts of folks. But like the history ones I always find like really interesting. So from my understanding, like fermentation in general sort of started by accident. Like people left like grains.
Keep that microphone.
Sorry, people left like grains in an indent, and like it rained, and then that fermented, turned into beer. Similar things happened with like pickles and sauerkraut. So very similar things there. But once folks sort of realized that these foods that had been like sitting out for potentially like extended periods of time, A, they were still edible, and B, they tasted really good. That sort of, in my opinion, sort of like sparked fermentation as something that people just do. And then also the fact that like folks learned that it's a great way to preserve your food. So if you have, say you're harvesting like a ton of cabbage or something, for example, you're not going to be able to eat all of that cabbage in one sitting, but if you have some salt, toss some salt in the cabbage, you make sauerkraut, that's going to last you for months. And this is like before refrigeration, you don't have a refrigerator or anything like that to keep that stuff in. Salt and fermentation allows you to preserve your food for long periods of time, and then you get to eat and benefit from all of that throughout the season when you're not necessarily getting as much stuff off of your land, or that's not as much like available at the market per se. So history of fermentation is so cool. It's been tied into like so many cultures. Every culture has sort of like developed their own like fermentation techniques at like different points throughout history. But like the cool part about all of that is all of these things are happening at different time periods in different parts of the world, but the practice, like the technique, is still generally the same. So that I just find really, really interesting.
Yeah, that rips.
Another thing that I find fascinating is like there's so much science or like related to fermentation now, and like you can find measurements and like recipes that are like so exactly precise, like getting it down to like the grams for the amount of salt that you have to add in. But like 100, 200, 500 years ago, people didn't have any of this stuff. It was all just like intuitive knowledge that was just passed down from generation to generation. And I think that's just like that transfer of knowledge is just like so cool.
Yeah. The like before there was Google Drive and SD cards, generational information was passed down through recipes.
Yep.
Almost, you know?
Recipes and conversations like we're having right now.
Yeah. Storytelling. And that's one good thing about, I mean, there's many good things about the United Theater plug. But we're focused on telling the story of our community, and that isn't just through movies or I was going to say educational lectures, but that's pretty, but like, you know, stories aren't just narratives. They're also the things that you pass down, traditions, you know, but like recipes, food recipes, you know. So the actual event, how's the event gonna function?
Yeah. So the event's on Sunday. So folks will arrive around 4. We're going to do quick little intro introducing Yellow Farmhouse and Koji Con, what's bringing us all there together. And then we have, we're going to have an awesome presentation from now a personal friend of mine. I got to meet him after Koji Con last year. This chef, fermenter, scientist, restaurateur, named Kuro Polo. So he's going to be giving a presentation on Koji, fermentation, and sort of how he sees the connection between like the cultural side of fermentation and like the history of it, connecting those to art and creativity, and sort of finding those intersections where most folks wouldn't necessarily think that like, hey, you can do this with this, so let's make these things together and work together.
It's so beautiful. I worked at a brewery for like 7 years, and one of the shirts that we saw all the time was beer is art. You know, craft beer is art. And it's kind of to your point that you were saying earlier about how these things that at one point began as cultural traditions then became extremely examined. Yeah. And have become this like I go to any craft brewery, you're gonna find someone there who is like who early retired from their Pfizer job as a scientist or a chemist or a biologist, and they're now they're brewing beer.
I know like guaranteed. 2 people who do that already. Yep.
Yep. And it's great because these people who like have worked their entire life in this rigid field of science, then have this ability to be creative and be artful with their tools of trade, which are Bunsen burners and beakers.
Yeah, that's such a, I didn't even really think about that, but yeah, there are like, it makes so much sense. You have all of this like scientific, like microbial background, like brewing is just harnessing those microbes. So it makes so much sense.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to play a game with you at the end here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Would you like to play a game?
I would like to play a game.
All right, very cool. Shout out Jigsaw. All right, so I brought along some pictures, some photos of items, and this game is called Fact or Fermentation, which actually doesn't play because now that I'm thinking about it, it's what. So what's going to happen is I'm going to show you a picture, and you're going to tell me, is this something that is fermented or is this something that is not fermented?
Ooh, I like that.
There might be one that's a trick question in here, but I'm unwilling to tell you which one because that's the game. But it is called Fact or Fermentation, which is kind of bullshit because it should be like fermentation or fiction.
Fermentation or fiction.
This game is called Fermentation or Fiction, and it always has. Okay, here. All right, so we'll start. First picture.
Yep. All right, so you have some sauerkraut over there. So that is a...
Hold on. Fermentation or fiction?
That is fermentation. So that is a lactic acid fermentation. So that is basically creating a salt brine. So when you make sauerkraut, you shred up your cabbage like it has in the picture. You basically just add salt and you massage that into the cabbage leaves. That's going to release a lot of the water and moisture that's in those leaves, and that's going to act as like your brine. You then put that into a jar or a crock or something like that, along with all of that liquid, and then your cabbage is just going to sit in there for a couple weeks, fermenting in all of the saltwater brine that was released from the leaves themselves, and then all of the natural like yeasts and microbes that are, regardless of how clean you get it, they're always going to be there, are naturally on your cabbage. Those are going to start to ferment. You'll start to see little bubbles in there, and then in a couple weeks you'll get like some nice like tangy delicious sauerkraut.
Bing 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 bing. You get half of a point. There's a total of 3 points. So if you get
Sweet.
So if you get every single one right, you'll get 3 points.
Perfect. So if I can do that.
So far, you have the record of most points scored in fermentation or fiction. Okay. Kimchi.
Kimchi, delightful. All right, so kimchi is definitely a fermented product, similar to sauerkraut in the fact that you're going to be using a cabbage. So kimchi... sauerkraut is European because it's using European cabbage. Kimchi is Asian, so it's using Asian cabbage, usually like a Napa cabbage. You're not necessarily going to use like a saltwater brine for like the fermentation for this process, but you are going to use another fermented product, which is called gochujang, which is a fermented chili paste. So you add that, you add your ginger, your daikon radishes, potentially carrots, and whatever else you want to mix into there. You're going to add in your gochujang. You're always going to add salt in any type of fermentation process. Salt keeps the bad microbes out, and it keeps the good microbes nice and happy. So you add a little bit of salt, and then right as pretty much the same as the sauerkraut, let that sit in a jar, sit in a crock for a couple weeks up to a month, and then you get some delicious kimchi.
Bing 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 bing.
Toss some kimchi on like your eggs or something. Chop some up, toss them on your eggs in the morning. It's delightful.
A friend of mine he's now a winemaker. He's a very talented man. His background is in hospitality. He's a great chef. He made like some pineapple wine. He's incredibly talented. Now, years ago, when we were in college, he made some kimchi. It may have been the most disgusting thing I've ever had in my life. He put like little like baby shrimps in there, you know, those little tiny shrimps.
You can add those. I would do that if you're a little bit more advanced in your fermentation process. You're adding raw seafood in there, so it can be iffy, but if you're doing it right, he was not
he did not know. Well, he insists that he knows what he was doing. He didn't. All right. You ready?
Yes. Number 3.
Number 3, banana bread.
Oh, okay. So, bananas, no. Banana bread, if you add yeast into it while you're making it, then that's going to be a fermented product. So I'm going to go like 50-50, half, depending on how you make it, it can be fermented. Depending on how you make it, it cannot be fermented.
So we do have our judges in Sweden, so there's a bit of a time delay. 1 second. They're willing to give you half points on that. Because
I will take half a point on that.
You give 1.2, 1.25 point. This one says, I wrote some stuff out. This one was a trick question. This one was one of the tricks. Banana bread is not fermented. Instead of using yeast or bacteria, it relies on baking soda or powder to rise, making it a quick bread without fermentation.
Okay.
But
that makes sense.
But your reasoning of, well, if you use yeast, if you ferment it, then it's fermented.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Swedish judges are they're gentle.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, we've got 3. So at the halfway point of our game, let's check in. We have 1.25 point out of a total of 1.5 points. How are you feeling about your chances here?
I'm feeling pretty good. I don't know what the other ones are, but I feel like I know my fermented foods. I think I'm going to do pretty good on this.
I think you do too. If I was you, I'd be pretty confident. Okay. Number 4. Kombucha.
Oh yeah, kombucha is definitely a fermented product. So that thing at the top, that's your SCOBY. That is your mother. So think of like a sourdough starter, like a vinegar mother. SCOBY is basically just that for making kombucha. SCOBY is actually an acronym. So it stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast. Yes. Symbiotic.
Whoa, you had that? You just had that in the in the wallet, dude?
Right. Symbiotic. Yeah, SCOBY. Symbiotic.
We'll put it up on the screen. If he's right, then we'll know. But if he's not, then sound off in the comments.
Someone will check.
Someone will check. I'm sure.
But yeah, kombucha is definitely fermented. It is essentially just fermented tea, and you get your tea, you get your sugar. The yeast and the bacteria in that SCOBY are gonna feed off of all of that sugar, and then that's what gives it its sort of like bubbly action. They're fermenting, releasing carbon dioxide into the beverage. And it's also, helping preserve it and add like a little bit more like extra nutrients in there too.
This is the grossest picture I've ever seen in my life. Let's zoom in on that.
So fun fact about kombucha. Our guest on Sunday, Kuro, he is currently in his master's program at Harvard University's Food and Science program. And he is doing his whole master's thesis or whatever on kombucha cultures.
See, that's where like education becomes fun.
Right.
When you're when you're diving into stuff like that, God, it's gotta be fun. Okay. So you're now at that. Well, ding, ding, ding. Fermentation or fiction. You got that one right.
Yeah.
Full points. All right. We've got 2 more here. Number 5. Beer.
100% fermented all the time.
This one's easy.
Yep. Yeast, grains, barley, hops. Ferment it. Let it sit. Ferment it again, and then you have beer.
Done and done. It's an easy gig.
It's an easy one.
Okay, the final one.
Let's do it.
So going into the final one, you are sitting at 2.25.
I'll take that.
So let's see if you can stick the landing here. Final one.
Pressure's on.
Number 6 of fermentation or fiction. Store-bought pickles.
All right.
Store-bought
pickles. Most of the time, there are some companies that do like fermented pickles. So most of the time, store-bought pickles are going to be quick pickles, which is using vinegar as the brine. So instead of using salt and water like you would in like a lacto pickle. You're going to be using just vinegar and then whatever other like seasonings and herbs you want to use to flavor your brine. So quick pickles are not fermented. They technically use vinegar, which is a fermented product, but the vinegar, the pickles themselves are not fermented. And yeah, I still like some store-bought pickles.
Man.
I still like some vinegar pickles.
So I don't know. I'm from Missouri, and I've never seen anybody in New England do this, but they probably do. Where we used to do this all the time. We'd have the remaining pickle juice in the jar. We'll boil up some eggs and just toss them cold.
Oh yeah,
and then just let them sit for a week or two. So incredibly delicious.
I've never had a pickled egg before.
Really?
So I don't like eggs that much.
Sure.
Which I just never been a fan. I've never had a pickled egg before.
The next time we do this, I'll bring you a pickled egg.
I will eat a pickled egg. I will try anything once. I'll try any food once.
Okay, this is the end of the show. I've got one last segment. Would you like to stick around for it?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. No one has said no so far. It would be really awkward if they're like, no.
I actually have places to be right now.
I'm out of here. This whole thing has sucked. At the end of every show, I look at Apple Podcasts app and see if anyone has left a review of the show.
Oh, cool.
And then if they have, I will read it on live on air. Live, quote unquote. Okay, so we do have a new review.
Sweet.
It's 5 stars. We got 5 stars.
Love that.
This one is left by username Hilbo Baggins. And this one says, I kind of have a crush on the host. That's actually huge. There's no way for me to know who wrote that. It does have some similarities to a screen name that my wife uses. But there's no way to know.
Funny.
There's no way to know. Eric Dawson, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
We're all very excited for the event on Sunday at 4. Any parting thoughts, any plugs that you'd like to shove in here now?
Plugs for Yellow Farmhouse. You can check us out on Instagram at YellowFarmCT. You can also check out our website, yellowfarmhouse.org, to see what we have going on. Also forgot to mention that another fun part of the event on Sunday, we're also going to be having a miso making demonstration. Hey. And folks will be able to take home some miso. We'll make it all together after the presentation, and then we'll have jars so you can bring home a little batch of miso, let it ferment, and then a nice way to remember that day.
How cool is that?
6 months from now, we'll try it and put it in some miso soup, and hopefully you'll like it.
And if you don't, we don't want to hear from you. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sticking around and listening or watching on YouTube. Get in the comments and tell us what you're excited. What thing that you think is fermented, but it's actually not. I don't know if that's too specific, but
there's plenty of fermented stuff out there.
All right. Well, thanks again. This is The Load In. I'm Lee. See you later. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the United Theater Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And if you could take a moment to leave a review, we'd greatly appreciate it. Your feedback helps us create content that you love. So hit that subscribe button and leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode.